Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our webinar on electrification in buildings and communities. My name is Chris Holt. I'm an economic fellow at the Institute for Policy Integrity, and I'll be moderating the panel today. For those who may not be familiar with our work, the Institute for Policy Integrity is a nonpartisan think tank dedicated to improving the quality of governmental decision-making. We produce original scholarly research in the fields of economics, law, and regulatory policy. We also advocate for reform before courts, legislatures, and executive agencies. Our primary area of focus is climate and energy policy. This webinar is part of a series highlighting environmental and energy research projects funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. We thank the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation for its generous support. Through these conversations, we aim to highlight cutting-edge, interdisciplinary research on energy and environmental topics, and to bridge the gap between research and policymaking. Today, we're going to talk about a very important topic, the electrification of buildings and communities. Buildings were responsible for approximately 35% of US greenhouse gas emissions in 2021. The transition to a decarbonized energy system will therefore require rapid, cost-effective, resilient, and equitable electrification of homes and buildings. This effort involves great challenges, such as ensuring that the electricity system remains reliable in the face of increased demand, and ensuring affordability and addressing disproportionate burdens of the energy system in low-income or disadvantaged communities. The effort to electrify buildings and communities also presents great opportunities in the form of energy savings, environmental and health benefits, and the creation of new jobs. Researchers are working out the technical details of how to make this all happen, while policymakers are working to create a financial and regulatory environment in which these changes can take place. This webinar will focus on both of these efforts and their interactions with each other. I'm going to begin by briefly introducing our panelists, and each panelist will then give a short presentation highlighting their latest research. After that, we're going to go into a Q&A session where we will open up the floor to questions from our audience members. Audience members can feel free to enter their questions into the Q&A function at any time during the presentations. So now to introduce our panelists. Dr. Paulo Cesar Tabares Velasco is Associate Professor of Mechanical Engineering at Colorado School of Mines. His areas of expertise include thermal storage, phase change materials, building energy simulation, heat and mass transfer applied to buildings, and building integration with smart grid. He has also worked at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, where he developed a simulation environment for their Smart Power Lab. His latest research takes a holistic approach to assessing the impacts of community-scale residential electrification retrofits in low-income communities. Next, Dr. Sergio Castellanos is Assistant Professor in Civil, Architectural, and Environmental Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. Through his work, he studies and helps create sustainability solutions for communities using tools and strategies at the intersection of energy, equity, and data science. His lab conducts projects all over the world with an emphasis on energy transitions in North and Latin America. His latest research focuses on assessing the impact of residential building and use electrification and demand response on the Texas grid. Next, Dr. Anna Diersen is Assistant Professor of Mechanical Engineering at Michigan Technological University. Dr. Diersen leads the Great Lakes Energy Group, where she uses energy analysis and grid-scale modeling to study the performance of renewable technologies and the operation of future electric power systems, with a focus on the impacts of climate change on those systems in the U.S. Great Lakes region. Her latest research focuses on assessing the technical and social barriers and opportunities for resilient electrification of homes and communities in rural northern areas of the upper Midwest. Next, we have Dr. Henry McCoy, serves as Senior Advisor to the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation at the U.S. Department of Energy. Prior to that, he served as the Director of the Office of State and Community Energy Programs. Dr. McCoy's experience spans many fields of expertise, including business, community and economic development, policy, government, finance, energy, philanthropy, and academia. Today, he will discuss his work at the Department of Energy developing electrification programs and how his current office thinks about the role of research in the policymaking process. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Tabares Velasco.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everybody, for organizing this event and inviting us. It's truly an honor to be here. So let me go on and start my presentation. And Chris, can you just give me a heads up to say that, can you all see the presentation?
Yep, looks great. We can see it. Thanks.
Thank you. So yeah, let me talk about one of the projects that we are doing right now here in Colorado. And before I start and get excited about this, I want to first acknowledge our sponsor and partners. First, the Sloan Foundation and the Colorado Energy Office. They were our first supporters of this project. Of course, I had to also acknowledge my home institution, Colorado School of Mines, and now the Department of Energy, who now will allow us to expand this work to more communities in Colorado. And our partners, Energy, Energy Outreach Colorado, who is the main nonprofit who managing the retrofits and electrification. Class City Conservation is the boots on the ground, who do very important work too. And then Emporia Energy, and who provide a lot of the technical systems for the project. And NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, who's supporting us with some of the software and analysis too. And my team at Mines is also pretty, I think it has, science should be done with different expertise from different fields: mechanical, electrical, computer science, political sciences, and also economics. And because we want to really tackle this challenge in a more holistic manner. The main thing I want to mention here is that we do want to, when we talk about electrification and decarbonization, the way I think about this, if we want to make it happen, we got to start thinking and addressing it and working at the community, at the neighborhood level. So a lot of interactions at the social and physical that happen in the neighborhoods that we don't fully understand, and we're not really also tapping into, that we need to if we really want to achieve our goals. However, most of the research and work done at the U.S. has typically done at the system level, a small house, a heating system, or it could be done at the whole city or whole state or even the whole nation, right? So there's a little gap that I've seen that in the neighborhood community scale that now becoming more relevant, that we need to tap to fully address this problem. And we need to look into solutions that, and with the energy equity in mind. And with that, I mean that, of course, we had to look into the latest technology that offer low carbon and flexible energy benefits. But also we need to, at least for myself and as an engineer, we need to go beyond energy, right? In my network, we always think about energy, peak demand, but they really want to reach out to the greater population. We need to start thinking beyond that, right? Health, wealth, energy equity, and so on. The last thing is also very important. It's low income housing needs and constraints. And I'll talk later about this, because if the house doesn't have a space to put a system, I don't care if it's free. If it cannot fit in the house, you cannot put it there, right? So I'll talk more about that too. So with that, the objective of this particular project that I'm talking today is to quantify the benefits, benefits of community scale holistic energy retrofits and electrification. The idea is what happens when you do a whole block, right? A whole neighborhood, right? All at once. Well, again, almost at the same time, right? So rather than doing a house here, a house there, you do all the houses in the same neighborhood. That's the whole idea, right? And how can I do this? We look into the in the first retrofit, the envelope, insulating, having better attic insulation, air sealing, and then look into the heating and cooling system. Put more efficient systems there. Same for water heating, and have a smart control so you can better, control, how energy is being used in the house. And beyond that, we're also looking into adding on-site solar panels, or solar photovoltaics, or PV, and batteries. The idea is that we also want to reduce carbon emissions by 50% or more, and provide resiliency to the community. So if the power goes down, you have energy for a few hours there. I also want to mention this, that all of this work, it's basically at no cost to the residents. It's covered by the Recession Assistance Program. It's a DOE program that all the states manage. And I'll talk later about the good stuff and all the challenges with the WAP program, right? Yeah, that's what I want to say here. Our project has multiple tasks. I won't go to every single one. In fact, I only want to talk about the first one: engage communities, right? This is a critical step that you need to start right there. I will say before you start your project. In our case, when we were writing our proposals, we had like a year before that, engaging with the communities, talking to different partners, stakeholders, to first figure out where was a place to do the work, and also start working with the community too. So the community that we choose is in Lake County, Colorado, which is about 10,000 feet above sea level. it's very cold. It gets very cold, and it's a resident-owned community. What does that mean? It's actually a home park out of 28 manufactured homes. If I don't know if people are aware what home parks are, but typically they're many times wrongly called mobile homes. They are not mobile, but typically in these places, the people living in these houses will own the house, but will not own the land. So you have to rent for the right to have your house in that land, and it can be pretty high rents there. So this one is actually one of the first ones in our state that was able to work together from a cooperative and bought the land back. So now they're on the land, right? So we have 28 houses, 22 are part of the cooperative, and we started the work last fall. We did the energy assessments last fall. This is actually my students installing the sensors. We instrument the houses in there, and then we are right now, doing the retrofits, and this summer we'll do the electrification too. We also want to quantify the benefits beyond energy. So we are installing multiple contaminants sensors in and out. And to me, one of the main concerns is we must do no harm, right? So whatever we do, it has to be better than before. It cannot be worse, right? So we are measuring the particulate matters, radon. That's PM 2.5 is particulate matters that lower than 2.5 microns. Looking to CO2, air temperature, and relative humidity. Also keeping track of the energy of every single breaker, and in most smart and in most electrical outlets, which I can talk more about it too. And this is so all of our sensors basically need Wi-Fi to send all the data to the cloud, and we are not using the residence Wi-Fi. We come with our own Wi-Fi and put our sensors. In this particular house, we put more sensors than we need to. Why? There's a couple of new sensors in the market at a much lower price that we wanted to test for future work, right? So we put 2 or 3 more than we need to just to compare different sensors there. One thing that I'm pretty excited about this is, and I think makes our project unique, is that we are developing a dashboard, not for me, an energy geek, right? But for people out there in the community, right? So it's how do we use all the data we're collecting and deliver a simple, effective message so we encourage people to take action, right? So with that, we are, the idea is we can provide real-time peer comparison, and that will drive residents to take action, to drive the energy savings even more, right? So, and to do that, it's a co-design with the community. So at the beginning, we ask residents, what would you like to know, and so on. And then with that, we first develop the first version of the dashboard, where we put comfort, air quality stuff. We compare. This is not real data. So you can see how it's looking, how they compare themselves to the community, the energy use, the main energy users, and so on. Last 2 weeks ago, we did a focus group to get more input from the community, and we have to have a couple of iterations until we develop the final dashboard that is simple enough, but at the same time, send the right information for people to take action. Okay, so I can continue talking about the project, but I want to share some of the lessons learned so far. This is our second year now in the project. The first part is the community. They are the most important one. Without them, there's no project, right? So it's how do we get their trust, right? And that requires a lot of community engagement. We started working with a community-based organization that the community has worked for many years, so they trust them. And that was our it helped us first find the community, and they help us also introduce to the community. Second thing we also did is identify a leader in the community. The person who was that leader in the community helped us basically get most of the applicants for the project. Then another thing we did, all our meetings are in the building owned or rented by the community-based organization. Why? Many residents, there's a trust issue with the government, right? Either state, local, or federal. So we try to basically stay away from those buildings, so we don't have to have those challenges, right? So we do everything outside, in this building. One thing I would say, don't expect a full house, right? Because the people are busy. They have many things to do, in their daily lives. Our meetings are at 6 or 7 p.m. So because we know that this is a rural community, that they have to drive 1 or 2 hours back home, so they make it around 6 or 7. And we offer dinner and everything because we know they have other things to do, right? And this takes time, right? And then you also have to listen to them. We were doing one of our first meetings, I was asking why they would like to join this program. And one person said, because this will make our houses last longer. It will improve our houses, right? So it was not energy, it was not CO2, it was not smart controls, it was making my house safer, right? More comfortable. So it's again, how do we pitch the idea so people can take action? The other thing too, we have a very motivated, supportive team. And we have to, because we're not the first one doing this stuff, right? It's a highly experienced team from the state, utility. We have people, contractors too, and us too, right? So we also have a strong coordination between different governments, periodic meetings within most of them, and also very strong utility support from the utility. Now the trick is, I want to do is so that this becomes mainstream, right? Right now you need a very highly motivated team. We want to work so we can find solutions and find a framework so you can do it with the mainstream team, right? Not a highly motivated, highly supportive, highly experienced team, right? Because that will be really hard to make it every single community in the whole nation. Electrification, right? So if we want to decarbonize, we had to remove gas from on-site gas, right, or fossil fuels. So in this case, the state requires that if we're going to do upgrades, we have to upgrade the electrical panel to 200 amps. That basically by itself going to trigger the utility to do a electrical load analysis and see then if they need to upgrade the transformer, which may add 4 to 8 or 12 months of delays in your work, and a lot of more expensive too. In our case, we were lucky that again we have a very supportive partners in the utility company, and after doing an analysis, we realized that we don't have to upgrade the panels, which was a huge relief. There. We decided to go with cold climate heat pumps. Again, we want to remove fossil fuels. However, when we talked to residents and the utility, there were some concerns about being all electric. So we addressed that by doing a dual source cold climate heat pump. That brought some challenges because now there's not that many that can actually work in this type of housing. So finally we found a couple of ones there. And then I was talking about water heaters. We wanted to put the most efficient ones, which are the heat pump water heaters, but they cannot fit in most houses. So we're gonna go with electric water heaters. The WAP, the program for DOE, we have 15 out of 22. Maybe some will join later. The main issue with WAP, as some of you know, is quite a lot of paperwork, including income questions and questions about the citizenship, which it's maybe hard people to give you answers, right? One thing that we saw, for example, if this would be a multifamily building, we could do the whole building as long as the property was hot, or 66% of the units will be eligible for WAP. We don't have the same thing for home parks. It will be great, and it will make our job a lot easier if DOE WAP will release something similar that for a home park, as long as 67% of the houses will meet WAP requirements, that you could do the whole park. Because we spend a lot of time. The first 10, 12 were a lot easier. As you keep moving on, it's harder. So if we can get some of those rules, that would be great. Anyway, that's I think I'm gonna stop right here, Chris, and I'm gonna let the next speaker talk. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Paolo, for a very interesting presentation. Next, we'll turn to Dr. Sergio Castellanos.
Great. So great presentation indeed. I'm Sergio Castellanos, and on behalf of a great team of researchers and department colleagues, as well as financing authorities, I'm thrilled to speak today about our Sloan Foundation funded project, which is called Electrifying Texas Buildings to Support a Clean, Resilient, and Equitable Energy Transition. So this work is in collaboration with Mr. Taylor from the Texas Space Authority and Professor Zoltan Nagy and Javad Mohammadi from UT Austin, but it also reflects the enthusiasm of multiple students in my lab, the RESET lab, which stands for Rapid, Equitable, and Sustainable Energy Transitions, where we use data science and community-focused engagements to support equitable energy transitions. So a big shout out to them, Ricardo, Alessandro Japa, Sonia, Jasha, and others, which in my opinion, it's a great aspect of this project that support the development of the future generations of individuals passionate about equitable energy systems. And this work is taking place because across the US, we're seeing a huge momentum for efficiency and decarbonization happening through home electrification. Either advocates, utilities, federal efforts from the Biden administration that are focused on electrifying homes, but also, states are developing the new financial mechanisms to support the transition to increase energy efficiency and electrification. And at the same time that we're seeing all these positive things happening, we're also seeing how fragile and vulnerable some power grids can be. In our state here in Texas, we've seen tremendous clean energy resources growth, solar, wind, storage, but there's also significant load growth that require close attention. Furthermore, we saw in 2021, Winter Storm Uri led to more than 11 million people being left out with electricity, which, as we have explored, can be exacerbated and lead to inequitable outcomes. So this dual challenge, we, for one hand, need to understand and support the growing electrification needs, but also need to plan and care for the long term of our grid to be resilient, but also ensuring that the most disadvantaged are not left behind. And so this leads to the two type of research questions that I'll briefly discuss today. One is, how can we model the future electricity consumption as we electrify end uses in multifamily buildings? But the technical evaluation is only one side of the story. We have to ensure also communities have access to these technologies, and we need to know if this can be financed. So that's the second question that we have, is how can we assess this financial viability across different through a different mechanism to achieve this end use electrification of buildings. We're focusing on multifamily buildings, and this comprise over 20% of the U.S. housing stock, but they also contain the largest percentage of lowest income households and the majority of rental units across the country. So when we're trying to look at disadvantaged low-income communities, this is a critical sector to pay attention to. Furthermore, there are already documented disparities in terms of electrification when it comes to income, but also racial divides. So it only amplifies the need to conduct studies in this sector. What we're doing in these studies can be broken down into 4 different steps. The first one, we identify representative multifamily unit models across different counties in the state. We then model different scenarios of retrofits happening. We scale our results, and then we evaluate this financial eligibility that I spoke about. So in terms of the modeling energy demand, we use RESTOC, which I'm sure many of you are familiar, but if you are not familiar with it, this is a DOE's analytical tool developed by NREL that can assess the residential building stock, and then you can optimize energy efficiency upgrades afterwards. So it gives you very detailed energy use patterns by house build characteristics, but also by demographics. And so, it gives you a good understanding of how different architectures can impact the energy consumption. And so what we do is we generate different representative buildings across counties that are positioned in different climatic zones. As you can see in this map, we have different, at least 3 climatic zones in the state, and we select different counties. In this case, we select Lubbock, Travis, which is where Austin is, and then Hidalgo as the places that we focus on, just to reflect different, again, characteristics of buildings, but also different climatic zones, and reveal some urban-rural divides along the way. So what we've done is look at different appliances. In this case, you see induction cooking is one of them that we're interested in. I'm just putting here information about the assumptions and characteristics of each of these appliances. Air source heat pump is the other one. The third scenario is water heater or heat pump water heaters. And the last one is just a combined retrofit that includes all 3 of them. In terms of the financing approach that I just spoke about, we're looking at PACE program. This program is increasingly being made available in states across the U.S. It's just a mechanism that funds energy efficiency measures, but also water, actually. And what it does, I guess the benefit of it is allows a property owner to finance the upfront cost of the of energy retrofits and then pay the cost back over time. Depending on the state, it could be either through property taxes or maybe through a senior lien on the property. But at the end of the day, when we do this, as I mentioned, it gives you this upfront savings or upfront capital, to pay for those retrofits. And so the figure of merit that we use in this case, it's the savings to investment ratio, which is just the ratio of the expected savings over the lifetime of the investments done for that project. So we're just making that ratio. Everything above 1 is that you're saving more than you're spending in that appliance. And so that's our figure of merit, and that's our threshold to determine if there's financial viability. Ultimately, an important gap that this work is trying to fill is the development of assessment tools, such as that developed by PNNL for commercial PACE financing, or CPACE. In this case, what they did is a county-wide assessment on financial potential for financial financing authorities. But what they did is on commercial buildings, omitting the multifamily sector. So our goal in this work has been to fill that gap and provide information in multifamily by jointly working with the Texas Space Authority, which they have their own independent third-party review workbook. And so we filled this workbook multiple times across every unit building or any building in this county that I determined, and just make this detailed assessment. So just quick jumping into the results, we have achieved this expansion of the previous tool for commercial applications, but now into multifamily. As you can see in this table, what we see in the upper section is the CPACE, the commercial PACE that already exists, and now we're expanding, as you can see down below, for multifamily across different counties, but also across different years. So we're making projections of the house stock change, but also climate change, RCP 4.5, and understanding what are those implications. And so just to walk you through, give you a sense of what this looks like, and this is the distribution. On the x-axis is the savings to investment ratio. On the y-axis across time is the frequency of building distribution. And what we see is that if we unpack this in the table of numbers, just pay attention here to where the SIR value is. And you can see if you aggregate these results, there's actually, as of now, this type of appliances don't make the cut to be PACE eligible just because it's still relatively high investment cost. We can also understand this from a planning grid perspective, which is part of this work that we're developing, but I'm not showing today, just for grid planning into the future. We see seasonal demand profiles of what is the impact of using induction cooking stoves on an hourly basis. So you see here for our baseline scenario for both summer and winter, this is what you would expect in typical load profiles. But once you implement this appliance, you can see a reduction, which is slight or very minor, relatively speaking. But we can get a sense of again, the hourly impacts, which is important for other types of studies. Just walking you quickly through, we also have the air source heat pumps. Again, the distribution here starts to improve as opposed to the induction cooking. We're seeing now that for air source heat pumps, there is actually now plenty of instances where it's the SIR, the savings to investment ratio, is more than 1. And so we have tons of different metrics here that allows us to compute that value. But the important thing is that we're seeing instances where this is financially viable for multifamily units. And also from a broad perspective, this type of appliance yields the highest utility savings. You can see a huge dip in this case in terms of the load consumption, especially actually for heating and during winter, which is the biggest drop that you can see here in this graph from baseline to the retrofit. But also, just expanding here, the heat pump water heater, we see that yields actually a substantial electricity reduction. And in fact, this is the one that it's the most PACE eligibility, which is exciting overall. It opens up actually an exciting opportunity that we're exploring as a branching off of this initial project. As we start to look at the current adoption rates for electric water heaters, we are seeing here across Texas, we're starting to map out where currently the different electric water heaters are installed. And so this gives a sense of how can we start using this type of appliances, for example, as a virtual power plant. And so just again, going back with the different set of long-term planning results that we're seeing in hourly consumption, this gives us a substantial electricity reduction in comparison with electric resistance water heaters. And lastly, a combined retrofit overview shows us that there's a lot of PACE eligibility actually across counties and over time, especially through more detailed assessment. We've seen that especially in hotter climates. So if we look at the average seasonal demand profiles, we see that the combined retrofit accrues a combined reductions by about 40%, which is significant. We're talking about 40% of drop in electricity consumption from this sector. just a shout out for RRA because it's in full swing as we explore the potential to stack these incentives to, impact the savings to investment ratio. We can see that it makes a significant impact. And so sometimes reaching 100%, meaning all buildings would be eligible if there's retrofits for these appliances. So we believe this is a reflection of the positive impact of these incentives that they're having right now, but they can continue having in the years to come. Just summarizing what we see, and key takeaways: we're working on this methodology that couples the consumption, but with the critical piece of financial pace assessment. We developed a few of these scenarios, and we're starting to unpack this and understanding, on quantifying the impact on different counties here in Austin, but also in Hidalgo. We can see that almost 3/4 of all the buildings could be PACE eligible. And so there's untapped potential that we're starting to quantify. So with that, I'm very eager to continue learning about what other folks in the audience are doing, but also to explore collaborations, and very appreciative of the funding support from the SLO Foundation.
Thanks very much, Sergio. Very interesting. Next, we will hear from Dr. Anna Dearson.
Great, thanks, Chris. I will share some slides here. Sorry about that. We will start from the beginning. That's always a good place to start. Great. So yeah, thankful to be invited here and to piggyback off of Dr. Castellano speaking about gaps. I think I'll talk about a different gap, which is looking at rural and northern communities. This is an Alfred P. Sloan Foundation project led by myself at Michigan Tech and the team Chelsea Shelley, Roman Sidortzoff, Tim Scarlett, and some students. Nan, and I realized that I forgot to put Nellie's name on the slide too, so I really want to thank all of them, as well as Dave Bohawk and Josh Quinnell at the Minnesota Center for Energy and the Environment. Important parts of the team. This project really focuses on a gap, we think, in rural and northern communities. And I'd like to share this map because it well describes the blue to purple regions being cold to very cold climates. So blue are those cold climates and purple are those very cold. And we're really focused on only those parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and only the rural parts. So excluding the cities and the urban areas, and really taking this case study approach to try to focus on 3 individual communities that are closely tied to some tribal nations or indigenous communities in this area. So those in Minnesota are Beltrami and Clearwater counties, which is near one of the largest tract of the Red Lake Reservation, Iron and Ashland counties in Wisconsin, which is nearest the Bad River tribe, and then up near where I am in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Baraga County, which is including the Keweenaw Bay Indian community. So for those that don't know, Michigan Tech, where I'm located, is in the Upper Peninsula, uppermost part of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And so we're about 45 minutes away from Baraga County and some key partners in the Keweenaw Bay Indian community. But what we really want to understand, I guess our gap is understanding what electrification looks like and how it can be equitable, considering especially heating electrification for these kind of post-industrial or tribal communities in these rural northern areas. And in case it's not obvious why we would think about that are, well, one is that when you look at home energy use in these areas, about 60% of home energy use is for heating. And so clearly the heating season is really important when individuals in rural areas are currently often relying on propane if they're off the natural gas system, or even just heating their homes with wood stoves. Those provide, in a way, really resilient sort of personal energy services, right? And so the switch, thinking about electrification to perhaps an air source heat pump, not only is a new technology, newish technology, but also comes with really a trade-off of, okay, now I'm going to be reliant on the large-scale electric power distribution unless I have my own electricity generation on site. So we think that shift needs to be considered, especially for those communities regarding climate resilience in the future. We also think it's important to do this with new and more detailed data, because when you look at large-scale studies and large-scale models for building electrification, our hypothesis is that the energy modeling that's done for buildings doesn't usually represent these rural northern homes. Oftentimes, weatherization programs haven't yet reached these areas or haven't deeply reached some of these post-industrial or tribal communities. And in addition, the amount of income that is being spent on energy, so the energy burden tends to be very high in the tribal communities. So those are some of the reasons that this study is specifically focused in the way that it is. Our three kind of goals are: one, what are the technical and social barriers and opportunities for resilient and equitable electrification in the rural North? That's the top question on this slide here. But we're spending most of our time thinking about what is the resilience of heating and cooling services provided with electricity. So it's both the technical and the social, but very focused on heating and cooling services. Heating services was the main motivation for the project, but it's interesting to pair in the cooling services as well, because while communities like places where I live, often many homes didn't have air conditioning in the past, they may in the future as the climate warms. That's already happening. And when you pair that with the transition to air source heat pumps, now you have the potential for a reversible vapor compression cycle that can do both in a place where both weren't needed before. So both are interesting to consider. And then as the project progresses, we'll spend more time on this paired issue. It's shown on the bottom right here, which is about the development of renewable energy and energy storage on rural lands. So if the economy does proceed towards decarbonizing through electrification, a lot of that relies on rural land use, right? Assumes that rural land will be available for renewable energy and energy storage. Is that what those communities want, need? Is it beneficial? That's kind of wrapped into the second part of our project. But a really important part of the way that we're pursuing this research, which other speakers have mentioned too, is having a strategy for community engagement. And so in our case study approach, where we're really focused or hyper-focused on 3 individual communities in the Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota region, we can then also be focused on creating an advisory board that we hope well represents those areas. So this slide here lists the current members of the advisory board. There are 8 folks on the advisory board. And while I've listed their affiliations, they each act kind of on their own behalf as individuals, but they bring in a wealth of experience from Iron County Development Board, or the City of Lawrence, or Native Son Community Power Development, or American Indian Community Housing Organization. These are the kinds of voices that we wanted to make sure were part of kind of the framing of this project. And so this slide sort of describes how those advisory board members were invited based on what they could bring and how they could help us understand these communities and work better with answering the community's questions. So as we've met with these 3 communities throughout the 3 community advisory board members throughout the project, we've asked them things like, what have you been hearing in your communities about heat pump electrification or solar energy or wind power? What do you think we should be asking, and what would be helpful for us to provide back to the communities as we ask for the communities to engage in our research? And that's been super helpful so far. Right now, where we're at with that is that we've distributed the first survey, which is focused on understanding the current state of heating service provision in homes. A large part of that is understanding just the home characteristics. So what are the homes' windows and ages and sizes, and when were they most recently upgraded, and what sort of heating services do they have? That's a large part of that survey, and also understanding kind of the awareness around energy transitions. So it's really setting a baseline and helping to establish the initial involvement of the communities. From there, we'll expand that. Next year, we'll have another survey where we do begin asking people not only what is, but what could be. And so what are their preferences for energy transitions, for electrification in buildings, and also that renewable energy development piece. And the Community Advisory Board has also been helpful there in terms of helping us think about where we would go when we want to shake hands in communities, and how do we engage with events that are already happening in communities rather than asking folks to come see us, right? So we've been making a plan for being in each community and meeting individuals there to get more survey responses, and also just to deepen that relationship that we've begun with each of those different communities. Again, the motivation for this work is really understanding better how home electrification can proceed and be beneficial in these communities. And so a large part of that is going to be energy modeling, and that's what one student on the project focuses on. along with Minnesota Center for Energy and the Environment. So I don't have the end result of that yet, but we've been spending a lot of time pulling together that patchwork of, as you can imagine, information about rural housing is disparate, basically. And so we've been pulling together information from city assessors and state weatherization programs and a variety of sources to try and understand what the characteristics are of the homes that we should then put into a larger scale energy modeling activity. So far, so just preliminary results, but so far from some of the sources we've seen, it does seem like this is a worthwhile activity, because what you would get from the RECS, or Residential Energy Consumption Survey, when you look at the home heating sources, or just, for example, the wall construction, to give one very specific example, does seem to vary from the statewide weatherization program down to an individual county weatherization program. As this project is sort of midway through, I can say like some of the challenges are pulling together these disparate data sets. And one of the new approaches that we're taking is looking at using Google Earth images to apply an artificial intelligence approach to determine size of homes and whether or not they have propane located next to them, and is there an attached or detached garage, and try to pull together home characteristics like that could be fed into the building energy modeling activity. So that's kind of the technical piece of it. And the other sort of social piece of it is the legal, regulatory, and policy analyses that we're doing. Our initial framework was to kind of look at energy justice forms from affirmative and prohibitive principles of energy justice, and across energy justice forms of distributive recognition, procedural, and restorative. Again, we're sort of partway through this project. So what I can say now, as we proceed with the review of both verticals, so going from local level to state to federal level policies and regulations, to kind of horizontally across topic areas, electrification, heating, and decarbonization in general. We can see that, of course, the IRA, as was mentioned by a previous speaker, the IRA is key factor now, and we can see that it's providing a structure for aligning some of these themes and bringing a justice lens into the implementation. But of course, how the IRA is implemented will be a major factor in what actually happens. At the state level, again, just sort of preliminary comments, we can see that Minnesota and Michigan might be better positioned with their recent and kind of sweeping energy policy changes versus Wisconsin, which has more of a patchwork. So those are sort of some preliminary thoughts in the policy space. As we look across this local, state, and federal levels on the legal, regulatory, and policy review, we at the local level, what that looks like is looking at home building codes, right, and siting constraints and things like that implement the local level. And so that's something we'll be speaking more with the community advisory board about. But from our initial conversations with them, they did highlight that considering the issue of tribal energy sovereignty, and how does tribal energy sovereignty play into this calculation of equitable pathways for electrification of homes in rural northern regions. So in conclusion, I'm happy to talk about this more, but I always want to thank the students that work with me in the Great Lakes Energy Group. We're really interested in a variety of topics on sort of these cold climate and northern energy transitions, and this idea of building electrification is really interesting to us as we look at air source heat pumps and rural building stock and tribal energy sovereignty. I think themes that we're looking at Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan certainly apply in other places too. So I'm excited about where this conversation might go. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. So before I turn to the last panelist, I just want to suggest to the audience, I want to encourage the audience members to continue to put in their questions to the Q&A chat function. There's some great questions in there already, so please keep them coming, and we'll look forward to addressing those shortly. But now we'll hear from Dr. Henry McCoy.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. All right, well, happy to be on this great panel. It's been very interesting listening to my co-panelists, and just to get some context thus far. I think that each of the panelists have really framed a bit of what I'm gonna talk about briefly today. Anyway, Chris, as he kind of introduced this around electrifications in buildings and communities, talked about the idea of electrification leading to goals like energy savings and creating jobs. Paulo, talking about the whole community level aspect of the electrification work, weatherization, which I mentioned in this as well. Energy justice, which is a key part of this work, as you know, and many of you may know, Justice 40, which is executive order that President Biden signed, shortly after taking office, really frames all this work. And Paulo also used a great quote from Dr. Seuss that I've always actually used in my classes as I would teach students. Think about Sergio, he's talking about the affordable home energy earthshot, which is one of the actual areas that my team helped set up along with the new team that I've joined, which is the Office of Science, and looking at how do we bring the cost of affordable housing energy efficiency down to 50% over the next 10 years. We talked about labs and the tools that they form to help this work, as well as appliances and things of that nature. And Sergio also talked about the financing piece, and certainly a key part of the investments that we make look to help address those things. Anna talked about this idea of equitable pathways in rural and northern communities, particularly tribal communities. And I've mentioned tribes in this work as well, and how we've made investments in tribes and reducing energy burden from that standpoint. Also, we've heard about single family homes, multifamily homes, and things of that nature. We heard about the Inflation Reduction Act. So I want to take kind of a 30,000 foot level. I want to go back up, very broadly, and give you a bird's eye view of what's going on in this work. So just from a broad standpoint, this work really focuses on how do we connect to these broader goals that the administration and largely the country have around reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, 50 to 52%, 100% clean energy by 2035, net zero by 2050. As you can see, that sharp decline is something that is a key, and building electrification is a key part of how do we reach those goals. So we do have these underlying aspects that drive this work. You look at this work, Congress has allocated a tremendous amount of resources to this work. And so Department of Energy itself has about $100 billion in funds that stretch across all of our different offices within there. But we also have a $400 billion kind of loan and loan guarantee, particularly in our loan programs office. And you look at, different categories that we're investing in, everything from hydrogen to energy storage, workforce, EVs, cybersecurity. The red buildings, efficiency and electrification, focuses on what we're talking about here today. I'm gonna talk particularly through the lens of the office that I came in here to stand up and operate and move forward, which is called SCEP, the U.S. Department of Energy's State and Community Energy Program. As mentioned in the introduction, I've left SCEP recently to actually try to institutionalize some of this equity investment work into our overall DOE landscape and kind of our overall network of labs and offices and the whole DOE complex. But I'm gonna talk a bit about SCEP through the lens of SCEP, because I did come in to stand that office up. I stood it up along with building out a team and it's still in good hands as I move on this work. But SCEP was created with originally $6 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law. We talked about IRA, but there's some funds in the bipartisan infrastructure law that also helps with electrification. So there was $6 billion initially around that pool of funds. Additional $10 billion came in with the Inflation Reduction Act. But I mention that because, the State and Community Energy Program is DOE's foray into this idea of deploying resources very uniquely so at a community level. So it's the first time that DOE really has been in the business of looking at a whole community approach to invest in, and we're tying that into the whole electrification aspect. SCEP was broken into, and is broken into 4 different program divisions. You have the Weatherization Assistance Program, which has $3.5 billion. We've heard a bit about weatherization. Paulo talked about it, and we've heard it elsewhere. So it's $3.5 billion now to make those investments. The state energy program, which invests in all 50 states, 5 territories, and DC, has about $810 million to help those states with their electrification and energy goals. The community energy program is one of the newer areas. Both weatherization and state energy program actually have been around for nearly 50 years, but they historically was in another area, but they were used as the anchor for this new Office of State and Community Energy program. And so, they are the tried and true in terms of investing. The community energy program is another way of bringing together other aspects of community, schools, nonprofits. Our workforce work falls into the community energy programs as well. Just a much broader way to touch points in every which way across the community. Then the technical assistance program, the partnerships, which is the largest of the areas, $10.1 billion. That's where the actual home energy rebates lie, which I talk about in a moment, where a lot of electrification work touches. But SCEP as a whole reaches about 250 million Americans all across, territories, and it touches does work in all 745 tribal nations across the country, thousands of communities, nearly 2,000 local communities, along with the 50 states and the 5 territories in DC. So if you look at this kind of bubble chart, SCEP made up of 28 different programs, 28 different programs. Each of these bubbles show kind of the amount of money dedicated to this work, and all these things actually do have an impact on the overall idea of electrification of schools, of buildings and communities, because it gives a broad standpoint across the board of, making investments from the workforce side, making investments through state and local governments. Again, the big bubble, the $8.8 billion for home energy rebates we're the largest consumer-facing aspect of that work. The weatherization assistance program, historically $3.5 billion. So this gives you a sense of what those dollars look like at scale. So you heard a little bit about the weatherization program, and I won't spend a lot of time on it because, again, you've heard a bit about it. But the $3.5 billion that Congress allocated as part of the weatherization program is probably about 10 times more than the normal annual allocation. That $3.5 billion is expected to be able to weatherize about 500,000 homes. And part of this work is not only about weatherization for health and for greenhouse gas emissions, but we do look to reduce energy burdens. And so, making these investments they save resources for the millions of households across the United States. And so it's a program that has maintained support over the last half century as a key part of this idea of electrification over time. Weatherization program is an annual program, so the monies continue to come on an annual basis, and you have to be within a certain income category to actually qualify to get weatherization. The state energy program I mentioned, so you go from the residential aspect of the low-income households, the weatherization program, which happens in every county in the United States, gets funded to do that work. So you have weatherization happening all across the United States. The state energy program is focused on, again, getting money into the hands of the state governments and territories, and letting them make decisions about how they think they can best make investments related to different aspects of energy, particularly with electrification being one of those. And so we're the largest funder of state energy programs. This gives you just a quick idea of what these dollars look like. So from a standpoint of the IIJA, which stands for Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, if you look at these different categories, you look at the top, the building, training, assessment, career skills, and so there's $260 million that's set aside. In the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, about 60 million of that is set aside for training. You have energy efficiency materials pilot, because you're always trying to find new ways to invest in electrification, revolving loan fund, grants for public schools, nonprofits, state energy programs. So you see, this is where the $6 billion lies as relates to making investments through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that can affect electrification. Here's a quick example: the nonprofit program. This goes out to nonprofits who want to help to electrify their buildings and reduce energy costs. Turns out energy costs are the second largest cost to nonprofits, and so this is a very popular program that is within SCEP. You have the $500 million, which goes out to schools and school districts across the country. The idea is to both reduce the buildings, their greenhouse gas emissions, electrify them, but also introduce these opportunities from a workforce standpoint to students who may want these jobs going forward. From an Energy Futures Grants, this is one of the newer programs within also state and community programs. It's also an annual program, but the idea is to bring, it's only $27 million from a pilot, but the idea is to give local governments an opportunity to partner with others to come up with new ideas on how they might want to do the electrification of buildings and retrofit. So, this has become a very popular program. The $10.1 billion, so each of those were from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. This is from the Inflation Reduction Act. $10.1 billion that SCEP received, broken down into $8.8 billion for rebates to get new appliances or to do the whole home energy efficiency upgrades, $200 million for workforce training, and then another $1 billion to help states adopt standards. Well, adopting standards is a way from a policy standpoint that helps to drive this. And so if you think about this from a holistic standpoint, it looks at both the supply and demand side. Do you have the workers? Do you have the investments? Do you have the codes? Do you have all those things that will drive the development of these buildings from a retrofit standpoint and energy efficiency? This is just kind of a breakdown that of the $8.8 billion is going to home energy rebates. Again, $4.3 billion going to whole home retrofits, $4.5 billion goes to the electrification appliance rebates, with $225 million of that set aside for tribes across the country. Alaska and some of the areas that Anna talked about. And then this is just a quick overview as I wrap up of the different kinds of appliances and things that you can bring up, heat pumps and AC ventilation systems, whole home air sealing ducts, things of that nature. So it gives you a sense of what you can actually invest in. This is, again, the training, $260 million in terms of allowing training to make sure folks can actually do the work. And just some tax credits that have been allocated. There's 30% heat pumps, air conditioners, water heaters, home improvement tax credits, solar tax credits, battery storage, new vehicles to try to electrify the whole home. And you heard earlier about, kind of this idea of really electrifying communities. We have IRS funds that go back to local governments and others who want to do these broader projects to do, whole neighborhoods or communities around that. You get a tax credit back. 30% of the cost is paid by federal government. Air conditions, 30% up to $600 on this work to get air conditioned. So there's a lot of policies and investments that we make. And finally, we do technical assistance in a way that hopefully helps those communities who they can see what others are doing to try to do this work at scale. So we try to amplify this work to make sure everybody sees it and gets excited about it. And anybody who's interested can, feel free to go to energy.gov/bill to see some of this work. So I will stop there and let's move into the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. McClure. Thank you all for the presentations. This is all very exciting research, and there's quite a bit to dig into. But a common theme that unites this entire panel discussion is that this work requires a systems level, holistic approach, whether that means looking at grid itself as an integrated system with many pieces working in concert, or efforts towards economic development as made up of policy designs, investment efforts, and community engagement, all working together. So as a jump off point into the Q&A, I'd be interested to hear how the panelists perceive what they perceive to be the bottlenecks, the issues that, if resolved, could really open up system-wide benefits. So I'll start with Paulo and put this question to you. What do you view as an example of a major barrier to electrification of communities that deserves more attention, either from a policy, social, or technological standpoint?
Am I the one that I've lost connection? Yeah.
Oh, it looks like Paulo is having some technical difficulties. So I will hand it over to Sergio to address that question.
Yeah, well, I think Paulo mentioned this, but one of them is distribution level infrastructure upgrades. I think there's a lot to be done, and once you start looking into the numbers, it seems to be a huge place to make investments. But the other one that, you know, it's very fresh in my mind is the lack of consistent information from installers. So just speaking from experience, you know, we're trying to install a heat pump water heater. Some of them, first of all, wouldn't install them at all. Some others would advise against that. And so it seems at times that you would have to push for having this electrification process. And I've heard similar stories from colleagues when they're trying to go for air source heat pumps as well. And this is not a Texas story, but it's actually across multiple states. So I think, you know, having the right information from the installers, the right skill force as skill training, as Dr. McCoy was saying, those tend to be, in my mind, some of the biggest hurdles that we have to overcome.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes. Dr. Dearson, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly agree with those. I'm nodding my head along, but to add some other things, I don't know, but I wonder, a hypothesis is there just a education piece to, especially around heat pumps and the interaction of what electrification means for supply versus demand, or the combination of the two, and how does a heat pump even work, and how does this thing provide a COP of more than one to my home? Like, I wonder if that is a barrier that's limiting the adoption in some places. So that's one. And then I also wonder about the interactive, again, perhaps an education or modeling challenge, but I wonder about the interactive piece of air quality and electrification with heat pumps. So again, thinking about wood stoves versus propane versus natural gas, and what the in-home air quality impacts are, each of those, and how those interactive, how those things interact. I wonder if that's a piece that's missing too.
Great. Yes, and now we have Paolo back, so I'd like to give you an opportunity to weigh in on that question.
Thanks, Chris. So I will say two things. So one is, how do we make this appealing so that people that are energy geeks will do it because they had to do it, right? It's like an iPhone. People bought an iPhone not because, you know, they really need that stuff, because they had the desire to buy that stuff, right? It became multi-purposes. So how do we make that appealing, right? And so that's one thing. And I believe in a way that people can understand it. Simple. Am I frozen again? No. The second thing I will say is, how do we make it, how do we get better, larger workforce? We need more, not only engineers, but what I call energy professionals, right? We need economists, policymakers, you know, engineers, electricians, right? HVAC techs, right? How do we make these so that people feel like this is a way, industry to go, right? So how do we get more kids into community college? How do we get more people into law school for energy policy? How do we get more of everything into energy? That's what I would say.
Great, thank you. And yeah, and I'll put the question to Dr. McCoy as well, because you've have so much experience investing in communities, and it's difficult sometimes to measure how those investments come to fruition. So I'd be interested to hear kind of that perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, and I echo everything that the other panelists said. So I won't double down on that. You know, I hear workforce all the time when I go around, and those issues and the scale. But one thing I would add, the new aspect of it is, I think it actually is the scaling up and the sustainability of these kind of investments, even with, you know, $16 billion from the Office of State and Community Programs, $100 billion across DOE. There's about $500 billion in funding around climate across the federal government in different agencies. That's still only a small number compared to the actual need of investments. You know, we have resources that we give to different states. I remember I was in Minnesota, and the amount of money that we were giving to Minnesota for electrification around the rebates was maybe, let's say it was you know, $300 million, which may have more or less. That would only touch a small portion of the households in Minnesota. And so I think one of the big issues is, how do we actually continue to make these investments, whether it be that state governments decide they want to make investments, local governments, or, you know, as you know, Sergio talked about the financing, finding ways for the private sector to come in. So how do we keep this work going?
That's great. Yeah, and I'll from there I'll segue into a related question about a specific program. So this is from an audience member, and I think I'll put this to Dr. Castellanos, but also Dr. McCoy perhaps. So the question is, for Texas multifamily housing, it's very exciting that many facilities are PACE eligible. What percentage do you expect to actually participate, and how do you overcome barriers to participation in this program?
Yeah, so one of the things, we were partnering with the Texas Space Authority, and when we started this engagement, we saw that this is not offered across the entire state. And so, counties, there has to be a process where counties buy in the process, and then once that happens, then installers can start acquiring customers. So I think that, and it'll start with legislature approving this process or this program. So I think it's a series of steps that need to happen for the customer to have that opportunity at the end of the day. And so, there's needs at every level, at a county level. Once you have that approved, then this is where a lot of the inspiration for this work came. How can some of these installers know where to tap into the customers, right? Just as with other technologies like solar storage, you name it, there's a customer acquisition process and cost associated. If we develop tools that can point to regions where there's high probability and high savings to investment ratio, I would think that that's a way to diminish the feedback loop to approach these customers and then engage with these conversations that have been brought by my colleagues in this conversation, lure them, get them excited, and just show the financial communication of how this makes sense to them. So I think it's a very broad answer, but I think it just reflects the need as well, that it's very broad.
Yeah, and I add this in the sense of, I think also taking a look at this, I think information is key, right? I mean, in terms of the understanding that, as it was said, that sometimes people, you got to get people who necessarily aren't super advocates for, who may not really, frankly, care so much about the greenhouse gas reduction and aspects of that to actually care about this. The part I want to add though is that you also have to think about the potential for things to go wrong. Anytime you start talking to people about potential liens on their properties, or you talk to them about, even with the home rebates program, there's a conversation about, well, the states use part of the money for part rebates, and then customers take out loans again for the rest of the upgrades, and then you create new debt. And when you start talking about low-income households, what does that mean when you're saying, well, hey, you know what, the energy costs will pay for themselves, but you got to make sure they do pay for themselves, right? Because people also have to change their habits and things of that nature. And then kind of finally to that, this is something that everybody may know. I didn't know until I into the administration. Every single letter that's written to the president or the vice president, somebody actually gets answered, right? Most of the letters that I get, that I see, that I get from the White House that we need to respond to, are letters that were folks saying that, somebody came to them and said that, hey, if I pay you this money to get these solar panels put on, I pay you this money to do that, the government's going to give me all my money back, right? And, there's a lot of fraud that goes on out there. So I think anytime you're dealing with situations where there's some public microphone where people are hearing about programs, they're hearing about part of it, and then somebody jumps into the gap and say, well, you know what, let me go out there. So if anything that keeps me up late at night is sometimes thinking about the potential, folks out there who are circling around trying to take advantage of people, particularly older people on fixed income, low income people. So I think those are real challenges as well when you think about how to finance this work going forward.
Definitely, that's great. So yes, this theme of engagement on many levels is also kind of permeating this discussion quite a bit. An audience member brought up this notion of a business model of transactive energy, and so engaging with rebates is related to that, but also even into things like time of use pricing and stuff like that. So Paolo, you mentioned this a little bit. Are there limits to consumer engagement in terms of their energy consumption, monitoring what they're using, and responding to things like prices?
That's a very interesting question, Chris, and I think we're going to see more of that, right? As people getting more engaged. And the trick part is, how do you either automate that or keep people engaged, right? So one way to, we have done that analogy to an Uber, right? Kind of how it become an Uber, right? Where, it will dispatch certain assets, depending on where the grid needs, right? And can you optimize it so you only have to say like tap it? Okay, I mean, like a Uber driver will say, I'm gonna take this person, right? So, so can we do that? And right now, what we're seeing in the community, people are very interested. Now that's to be seen, because what will happen 2 years down the road when this becomes something normal and that people have already make part of their lives. So I do believe that we can do that. If we play a little bit with the community interactions and some of the make it more appealing with people, that it will make the norm. So I think we can do that. Between variable electric rates, spiritual power plants, some type of dashboard that keep people engaged. I think this could happen, and showing the economic also benefit to them and the community.
Great. Anna, do you have anything to add to that? Is that consistent with your experience in the Upper Midwest?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about how the context would vary slightly. I do think time of use rates would encourage us in the right direction, but I sort of feel like it's the cart before the horse. Like, in some ways, we need to show folks where cold climate heat pumps can work, right? And for electrification to proceed, we first need to understand where it is beneficial. So I feel like that's the root of the issue for me here, but yes, otherwise I do agree.
Great. And we've got another question from the audience for Dr. Dearson. So in addition to data inputs for building models, are there other aspects where you have seen modeling shortfalls or challenges? For example, does it seem that the modeling tools themselves are capturing what you need with things that are less well studied?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that one up. I was interested to answer that because we're one of the things that we're currently working on, and again, I don't know the final result yet, but we're currently working on another related project with electrification in rural homes where propane or wood stoves are common. And so the interaction of indoor, like I mentioned earlier, indoor air quality and energy use becomes important. And the tools, you can link something like Contam with Energy Plus. Like, there are ways to do that, but it feels like that in this specific use case, it becomes more important, and the tools aren't, at least they're not easily set up to do that, although it is possible. So that's something that we're currently working through that I wonder if might be kind of a next place to go with modeling improvements.
Great. So I guess then the next question, since we've only got about 5 minutes left, I'd like to hear more about your thoughts on the policy-related research gaps. So what do you view as the most important areas where we need more resources, we need more research to facilitate this electrification transition? And I'll start with Dr. McCoy.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll be quick. A key part of the reason why I moved after setting up SCEP over to the Office of Science and Innovation, because one of the things that I think is critical is that we spend a lot of time on the physical and hard science side of this work, and the technical side and the technology and things of that nature. There's a humanistic side of this, right? How do people engage and interact? How do they make decisions? All these kind of things. And so an area that I'm pushing more for is, how do we bring more social scientists and behavioral sciences into this work? How do we think more about, how communities can absorb these resources, how those things happen? So I think there's certainly an opportunity there.
Thank you. Dr. Castellanos?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Especially from the perspective of the presentation I gave today, it's very community inspired, but it does lack the community engaged and understanding how, once those are set to be deployed, will they be adopted equally or not? As mentioned, we've seen issues already, racial disparities in terms of benefits for electrification in multifamily buildings. So exploring and addressing those gaps, I don't think the solution will come from a technical perspective, but rather from understanding the social implications. So agree with that comment as well.
Great. Dr. Tabares Velasco.
I agree with that. What I will also add is that from any funding agency or policy making and so on, it's important to understand that this takes time, right? Community engagement is not you develop a model and you run it and it works. No, it takes a lot of time. those relationships to build up, right? And those networks to start working, right? So it will be, we need to understand that, right? And those partnerships from social economy, social scientists, engineers, and so on, doesn't just show up one night, right? So one day, right? So this is something that we need to keep doing more and for a long time, right? So if we want to make this to happen. So that's the one thing that I will mention there. And I will say also to my panelist members, we're sharing a lot of data, which from equality to how people are making choices, and we're going to be doing some validation, but we're happy to partner if that's something that people are interested. So yeah.
Great. Dr. Dearson.
Yeah, just add that I think in terms of making the community engagement really valuable and worthwhile on both sides, one thing that I'm learning as a relatively new investigator is there's this sort of time cycle of funding, right? And then there's a different time cycle of building relationships. And so the relationship has to supersede that and exceed the funding. And so getting, while you have to be in sync with the funding, you also have to have a longer time scale in mind. And that's something that I think is really important to realize, as well as just the reciprocity in those relationships. Like once the relationship is built and you've established that you do have common goals and common interests, then making sure that, again, once that funding ends, that we really are providing something back, that it's not just using the data from the community, but what are we going to be giving back that's useful in return? Not just my paper, because they probably don't care about my paper that much, depending on who the user is. So those are some things that I've been learning in this community engaged work.
Great. Thanks so much. And there's some interest among the audience to know how to follow along with this research. So I'll take the last minute to offer to any of the panelists if they want to promote how to follow their research.
Yeah, I can put my lab website in the chat and communicate it that way, but that's probably the first way to keep on top of the different things we have going on. Thank you for your interest.
I say from Department of Energy, just you can follow the work at the U.S. Office of Science and Innovation. So go to the DOE website and all kinds of places you can plug in and see what's going on or what's been announced at any given time.
Excellent. Well, big thanks to all of our panelists for an excellent discussion. Thanks to our audience members for some great questions. And thanks again to the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation for their support in this webinar series and their support for so much important research. So please stay tuned. We have some future events coming up, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.